Let us continue with our agenda. We wanted to speak today about the e-commerce because all the world population was forced to be under lockdown and keep in quarantine for months even, and the way to survive by all the human beings on the earth has been through e-commerce, online commerce, and with the risks this entails. This is why we brought Alicia Sorroza to our event. She is the security leader of DHL Supply Chain Mexico, and José Luis Prieto, he is the regional manager of loss prevention for the free market. They will tell us what are the challenges for security from the e-commerce point of view. So Alicia and José Luis, welcome to the event. You have half an hour, and I would kindly ask you to leave 5 minutes for questions. Alicia, you are on mute now. You can start and open your camera. Thank you very much. Javier, it is difficult to start this speech um, after the great presentations we've had from Candido, from the previous speaker. Sorry, Alicia, but your camera is not on. Can you see me now? Yes, great. Can you see me now? Yes. Thank you very much. As I was saying, it's a great challenge to follow the working line after Candido's presentation, but we will do our best. We will make a general comment to introduce a topic that, as you say, well, e-commerce has changed us. Well, pandemic changed our lives, and at the same time, the importance of adapting to new realities and the new capabilities that we have to generate from the security point of view to respond to the new challenges. Can you see my screen now? Can you please quickly confirm? Yes, but if you can make it full screen, Alicia, is that right? Yes, perfect. All right. So basically, to make it quick, because I think we should all have this dialogue with José Luis Prieto. He has the full perspective as one of the main actors in e-commerce in Mexico, as well as the whole Latin America. And I'm sure that the great success and the great growth that this company has had has probably reached Europe and all the colleagues that are hearing us from Spain. So I would like to give you some kind of general overview about the e-commerce growth, specifically for retail in Mexico in this case. I'm not coming into many details, but I just want to give you an idea now. If you start comparing what it meant, what last year meant, see that 81% was 81% growth versus 2019. So reviewing the data in Spain, the growth was 20%. However, it's been one of the countries with the biggest growth. And this has to do with the starting point of each country. Mexico was not a country that was so much digitalized, and this allowed exponential growth in these very few months. It was the expectation for several years and not only 1 year, and this affects to all the stakeholders that work in this logistics sector to meet the needs, taking into account that e-commerce has been a basic element and it's been considered essential because operations never stopped at no point, as could be the case in other logistics sectors. But in our case, e-commerce allowed people to continue buying and to continue having their needs covered without physically going to a shop. This may be because of needs or because of fear or fear perception. I don't know whether José Luis would like to make any comment from the free market about the boom in this industry and how the lockdown generated a risk perception where we were all astonished as to what the pandemic was meaning for all of us, and the way we could continue with a certain normal life would be to focus on this impressive tool, which is the marketplace. Yes, thank you very much, Alicia. And I totally agree. One of the great success that e-commerce has had in Latin America has mainly been the approach or the customer-driven approach. That is, the companies, instead of only looking at the income or only thinking about providing a service to the final user, they became a mediator between the customer who is buying and also these small companies, micro businesses, which suddenly saw a great reduction in their capital and their uh, capacity to continue selling through traditional channels, and they found in e-commerce a great strategy to not only sell at local level, but also have regional sales. And this generated, of course, many risks as well. What happened in several Latin American countries is that as there was a reduction in the income in traditional sales, there were more crimes around the new income sources where the money is generated, and the criminals saw in an e-commerce the new target. So there was a loss or theft, and we need to be very vigilant so that this new modality that has generated many people who in the beginning believed that their business could be destroyed would not be affected thanks to e-commerce. But we have to be alert in terms of the risks, and they are probably going to grow throughout time as the e-commerce is also growing. Yes, I believe this is a key element to really understand that in complex societies with criminal levels that are high, where basically many of the traditional sources of income and the informal sources of income were for some months paralyzed, generated this complex context to continue maintaining an industry or a business capacity to manage the needs that were generated. As you well said, it was um, uh, the way to survive for many businesses and for the public in general. One of the big discussions around it is whether these behaviors and behavioral patterns are here to stay or will come back to the previous normal pre-COVID. But all the trends seem to say that even if there is a more normal dynamic in what we can really see is that there is now more infrastructure to respond to these needs, and this is here to stay. The digital channels that companies have opened, José Luis, for example, can present what is Mercado Libre, free market. This is the place where other brands can also have their digital channel. Could be Apple, Likey. Those who have children probably will know many of these brands. So it is really a crowd of companies that have decided to generate income in this way. And there is something as easy as health. Who hasn't had during this pandemic the need uh, to have, for example, a drug or something like that? We've been speaking during this symposium about different perspectives from the point of view of ports or the railway, which in Europe is so important. And finally, the marketplace and the fulfillment center are at the core of the business. And this is where Mercado Libre is also working with the support of DHL, where we have two very important sectors that we have to provide service to, and we have to focus on security. On the one hand, we have people who trust us to be their sales channel, and on the other hand, we have the final consumer, where we have to make sure that they receive their product properly. So it is important to bear in mind the satisfaction of these two parties to have the trust of the seller and of the final consumer. However, as we said, and this is something we heard about throughout the whole symposium, this black swan generates opportunities as well as vulnerabilities. And this is basically about the security from the perspective of biosecurity or a more holistic approach of personal or equity security suddenly comes through, and everyone understands this is essential to keep the level of the business. And Mr. Ocampo said that on the first day. We could say that the frequency of flights at the airport was going down, but security cannot go down. So, Jose Luis, maybe you can comment, how do you live this, or how do you experience this? How do you experience all the impacts of COVID to continue operating, to continue generating security on a complex space? Because as opposed to other industries, instead of contracting, we had to grow. And this meant, of course, many new vulnerabilities. We had to hire new staff, new personnel who had to be in operations. However, the resources for training and qualification may be lower. So, Jose Luis, maybe you can comment, how was your experience? Yes, of course. It was a great challenge for the company because providing sustainability and providing support to all the businesses that needed us when everyone was at home in lockdown and they could all have many different goods delivered. Well, we have to understand that this needs to be managed by people. We had distribution centers, and these people were exposed to the risk of the pandemic. So Mercado Libre implemented many different strategies for control and for security, always focused on the people, always focused on complying with different protocols, the use of protective measures, protective means, and beyond that, as we are speaking about physical products that um, could be articles that may host a pollutant substance, we had strategies about thermal nebulization with frequent cleaning of the products within the warehouses where the whole logistic process is done with the biggest standardization and complying with all the regulations so that they would never become vectors or transit agents. That was one of the main challenges we had to face in the case of e-commerce companies, and also generating information and trust for our customers, because there is going to be a person delivering the product or the article to you. So we have to make them understand this is safe and they can trust us. So each and every person, from the person packaging the product and the person delivering the product, we have included a qualification process so that they understand how a key role can be played in preventing the spread of the virus. And we are really proud that we have had a very reduced number of cases, of positive cases, and this has been a constant throughout these months. We could say that it was very well managed and helped us to continue with our business to satisfy our customers' needs. Yes, I totally agree. And this is very important. It was also mentioned before, how can you continue operating where part of your critical staff would at some point need to go home and be locked down, be in quarantine? And we know we have to establish a protocol, and this has generated many difficulties, but of course, security couldn't be left aside. An operation that is constantly growing and with very marked peaks, highs and lows, this generates difficulties in the planning and in terms of not reducing the security barriers we may establish in all the logistics phases, but there were, of course, unpredictable elements. We may go into the red light, and this red light meant that the operation would be increased, and you had to consider managing your resources in the best way possible, and it was not foreseen because you were not foreseeing that the light would become red. So in the pandemic, I remember our first conversations were, well, probably by August, we are better off. The vaccine will be there in December. We will all be vaccinated. And now we see it's not been the case. There's something else I would like to mention, which is important, how we lived, how we experienced this in the logistics chain, because the operations had to adapt very quickly to the new situation. In DHL Express, you had to open up a new route, and to respond to needs that were not forecasted, were not foreseen, either in space or in infrastructure. You didn't have a space foreseen. It was multiplied by 4, the space needed to keep all the products. And maybe José Luis can also tell us, those of us who work in security need processes, and we need those processes to be followed, because it's a key to identify deviations, because we all have to stick to certain processes with the operational areas. And in this context, has been and continues to be a great challenge, precisely because of this need to adapt, and from the point of view of security, in the sense that you have to establish guidelines that need to always be met to give the feedback in terms of what is the outreach and what can we do. For example, as Candido said, how can we accelerate recruitment of people, but we cannot reduce our controls in recruitment to make sure that we are not hiring an insider threat, for example, that may generate fraud, or who may generate losses that of course will have a very negative impact. So this is of course key, and from the point of view of e-commerce is a great challenge. Jose Luis, is there something you would like to comment, how you experience this from the logistics point of view? Because again, we had to adapt to the situation by meeting all the new standards and all the new protocols. Jose Luis, are you there? I don't know whether he is online, but I will continue. Well, basically, in terms of resources, this is something that has been very relevant. To what extent could we have the resources needed to continue providing our service in terms of security service providers? For example, because the security service provider is an ally, and we all have that in mind, and our providers, our allies, have the same restrictions that we do. So to what extent, this is something that was mentioned in a different panel, we need to have a minimum security standard so that we can all adapt and make sure that we all speak the same language and have the same security level. One of the things we said in this seminar that has to do with the title of our symposium and has its flagship in the security management systems is basically how can we have this critical context and very ever-evolving context where everyone is learning just on the go. There was no precedent as how logistics space could grow so rapidly. And at the same time, something we were working with, such as DHL or Mercado Libre, they have a way to work, but suddenly these new dynamics emerge. The culture and the security commitment we know are key, and they need to be cascaded into all levels. But this is something new, and it needs a new and different commitment from the top management to understand that even if they have a different standard, the security is key, and it's part of our differentiating factor.
New ways of raising awareness. We mentioned earlier too how hard it is to have direct contact with the team. Many of them are on the floor, but not everybody can be there because we need to do social distancing. It's been a whole plan generating all these ways of training to continue progressing and so that we won't fall back has been quite a thing. Because, of course, we could not afford to lag behind. Risk analysis. We're all used for the for the security unit to do the risk analysis and do the metrics. It's quite clear that we are the area responsible. We have to assess all the metrics and so on. But if something has been verified in terms of the speed of the challenges we had to overcome, is that we need to work closely with operations. And when there's going to be a change or a different process that's going to have direct impact on security, they need to get ahead of that. They might think it's coming, but they might not be fully aware of how it's going to have impact on the whole process, particularly in security. So we need to take into account that security is not just something that the security team does. We all need to assess to what extent a measure or an operational change makes the sense in the world or not, and is it needed to implement it or not? Because the business might be asking for it. What are the mitigation measures? What are the barriers for residual risks to be truly acceptable for everyone? Regulatory compliance, of course, not even in the worst of a pandemic or crisis can you leave that aside. But we need to create different formulas to carry out controls and make sure that people know we are just as supervised, even if we don't have the same calendars of audits as we've had. Technical solutions and innovation. Yeah, Jose Luis, if you're on the line. I'd like to say that this is a great challenge for everyone. We've talked about cybersecurity. Well, how can we make sure that growing, demanding operations at the same time, while it's grown and become part of the digital culture, how can it align in terms of security with all the tech new stuff? So that's a challenge for all security areas working in companies around the world. It is a challenge to see how we can complement security with new technology.
A José Luis nos ha escrito que le ha surgido un problema personal, ha tenido que salir, ¿vale? Así que continúa tú.
He had to leave.
Aprovecho para avisar
He'll
que
be
tenemos
back in
un
5 minutes.
poquito
In any case, you have some 5 minutes left. Okay, so I will finish now. There is something that we've seen that is absolutely key over the last few weeks, which is vulnerability tests are very important. When the planning is very tight, we stress the system and we do vulnerability tests is key to see how far we can go to really see if the barriers we've implemented have been successful. And then I think we calculated this well. Lessons learned. I believe this crisis is, giving us lots of lessons. It's shown that we need to be prepared, ready to react. Looks here like in security, we need to invest time preventing and being proactive, particularly when we see this type of vulnerability and challenge. And at the same time, we need to be focused on getting prepared for the next challenge because there's something clear, and it is that we can no longer just react to whatever comes. We need to work to have a general strategy so that security really is at the core and we are not, putting out fires, which is what we've been doing over the last few months. Why is this important? Well, swans will continue to appear and problems and other type of challenges. So we must continue progressing so that We're no longer in this reactive mood, but rather we have all the tools lined up to act based on our capacities. So Alicia, José Luis, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll see you again in person maybe next year.